Most people remember Pickfair as a white-walled Beverly Hills palace where movie stars dined under chandeliers, but the house was quietly dying long ahead of the bulldozers. Behind the gates, walls expanded without plans, debts stacked up, and whispers followed every illness, every divorce, every funeral that crossed the driveway. By the time Pickfair was demolished in 1980, workers spoke of cold rooms, sudden dread, and a place that refused to be fixed. This film asks how Hollywood's first palace became a burden so heavy it needed erasing, and why some believed a ghost was the least troubling thing inside. In 1919, Beverly Hills was still a gamble. The streets were dust and speculation. Most of Los Angeles lived closer to the ocean or downtown. The hills north of Sunset Boulevard held scattered hunting lodges, citrus groves, and empty promises from developers who insisted this would become something grand. Mary Pickford did not believe them at first. She had seen too many grand promises collapse. The film industry was barely a decade old, built on temporary stages and rented lots. Actors lived in hotels or modest bungalows, ready to move when the work dried up. No one expected permanence because permanence did not exist yet. But Douglas Fairbanks believed differently. He saw the hills and imagined a kingdom. He saw land and imagined legacy. When he found the hunting lodge on Summit Drive, a modest structure with 18 acres of scrub and scattered oaks, he understood what it could become. Not just a home, a statement. Pickfair began as 15 rooms. The original structure was simple, almost rustic. Wood-beamed ceilings, stone fireplaces, wide windows that pulled in the valley light. The property records from 1919 list the purchase price at $35,000, a significant sum but not extravagant by the standards of what would come later. Fairbanks moved quickly. He proposed to Pickford in that same year. They married in 1920. The wedding was private, almost furtive, because Pickford's divorce from her first husband was still scandalous in the press. But the house became their public declaration, a place where two of the world's most famous faces could build something the cameras could not touch. The name Pickfair was not romantic. It was functional. Pickford and Fairbanks combined into a single word, a brand before branding had language. The press loved it, the public loved it, and the house began to grow, not slowly. Pickfair expanded in waves, each renovation larger than the last. A new wing for guests, a screening room for private viewings, a formal dining hall that could seat 30. The swimming pool arrived in 1922, followed by tennis courts, stables, and a greenhouse that required 2 full-time gardeners. By 1924, Pickfair had become something unrecognizable from its hunting lodge origins. The square footage had more than doubled. The staff had grown to include cooks, maids, groundskeepers, chauffeurs, and a social secretary who managed the flood of invitations that arrived daily. The estate demanded constant attention, constant money, constant labor. But it worked. Pickfair became the center of Hollywood because Hollywood needed a center. The film industry was still fighting for legitimacy, still dismissed as vulgar entertainment by the East Coast establishment. Pickford and Fairbanks transformed their home into a palace of respectability. Foreign dignitaries visited. Royalty came for dinner. The Duke and Duchess of Alba, the Crown Prince of Japan, the King and Queen of Siam all passed through the gates. The house became proof that movies mattered, proof that actors were not vagrants but cultural royalty, proof that Hollywood could create its own aristocracy without bloodlines or inherited wealth. Mary Pickford understood this better than anyone. She had been born Gladys Smith in Toronto, raised in poverty, and became the most famous woman in the world through sheer will and calculation. She built her career one role at a time, controlling her image, her contracts, and her money with a precision that terrified studio executives. By the time she moved into Pickfair, she was earning more than $10,000 per week, a fortune that made her one of the wealthiest women in America. Douglas Fairbanks was different. He was charm and motion. He leapt across rooftops in his films, fought duels with a grin, and made athleticism look effortless. Off-screen, he threw parties that lasted until dawn, challenged guests to impromptu boxing matches, and filled Pickfair with noise and laughter. He needed an audience the way other men needed air. The house absorbed both personalities. Pickford's wing was ordered and controlled. Her bedroom faced east to catch the morning light. Her sitting room held her scripts, her correspondence, her meticulous financial records. She worked from home, running her production company from a desk overlooking the gardens. Fairbanks claimed the western side. His spaces were larger, louder, designed for gatherings. The billiard room, the gymnasium, the outdoor terrace where he hosted Sunday brunches for directors, writers, and studio heads. He moved through Pickfair like a man showing off a prize, constantly gesturing toward new additions and future plans. The additions never stopped. Between 1920 and 1928, Pickfair underwent 7 major renovations. Walls moved, hallways extended, entire wings materialized to accommodate new needs and new guests. The blueprints became a patchwork, each expansion designed by a different architect, each addition reflecting a different aesthetic. Spanish Revival met Georgian Colonial. Tudor beams crossed Italianate arches. The house lost coherence but gained scale. By the late 1920s, Pickfair was no longer a home. It was an institution, a destination, the single most famous private residence in Los Angeles and arguably in the entire country. Invitations were coveted, collected, and framed. To dine at Pickfair was to arrive. To be excluded was to be irrelevant. But the house was already changing. Silent films were dying, sound was coming, and the people who built their empires on gesture and expression were about to discover that their voices did not match their faces. The house demanded more than anyone admitted. Pickfair required a permanent staff of 16 people just to function. Cooks prepared 3 meals daily for the family and any overnight guests. Maids cleaned 42 rooms, most of which were rarely used. Gardeners maintained 18 acres of lawns, flower beds, and ornamental trees that required constant irrigation in the dry California heat. Chauffeurs kept 4 cars running, polished, and ready. The monthly payroll ran into the thousands. Beyond wages, the estate consumed money at a rate that startled even Pickford, who tracked every expense in leather ledgers she kept locked in her desk. Utilities alone cost more than most families earned in a year. The heating system was inefficient, cobbled together across multiple renovations, requiring coal deliveries twice weekly in winter. The kitchen used commercial-grade appliances that broke constantly. Repair crews became permanent fixtures, arriving weekly to fix plumbing, patch roofs, or rewire sections of the house that had never been properly electrified. Insurance was a nightmare. The property was too large, too valuable, and too customized for standard policies. Pickford hired specialists to assess fire risk, earthquake vulnerability, and liability exposure. The premiums climbed annually as the house expanded. By the early 1930s, she was paying more to protect Pickfair than most people paid to own their homes outright. But none of this appeared in photographs. The images that circulated in magazines showed sunlit terraces, sparkling pools, and elegant dinner parties. The reality was darker, more complicated. The house was always under construction. Scaffolding appeared and disappeared. Dust settled on furniture. Noise echoed through hallways as workers tore out walls to make room for the next expansion. The chaos exhausted Mary. She had imagined Pickfair as a retreat, a place where she could escape the demands of the studio and the scrutiny of the press. Instead, it became another performance space. Every dinner party required planning, preparation, and perfection. Guests expected grandeur. The press expected stories. Pickford found herself managing a palace when all she wanted was peace. Douglas thrived on it. He loved the spectacle. He loved showing off the newest wing, the latest renovation, the imported chandelier that had once hung in a French chateau. He loved the attention, the admiration, the constant validation that Pickfair provided. But he was rarely home. His career was changing. Sound arrived in 1927, and Fairbanks struggled to adapt. His athleticism did not translate to dialogue. His voice, reedy and higher than audiences expected, undermined the heroic image he had spent a decade building. His films began to fail. The studios lost interest, and Fairbanks, for the first time, felt irrelevant. He responded by leaving. Not permanently at first, just trips that stretched longer than planned. Location shoots that turned into extended vacations. Affairs that everyone knew about but no one discussed publicly. He would return to Pickfair for parties, for appearances, for the moments when he needed to be seen as part of Hollywood royalty. But the house no longer felt like his. Mary stayed. She had no choice. Pickfair was hers in ways it could never be his. She had paid for most of it. Her name came first in the portmanteau. Her money sustained it when the revenue from their films began to dry up. She could not abandon it without abandoning herself. But staying meant isolation. The house was too large for one person. Most of the rooms stood empty. The grand dining hall, designed for 30 guests, hosted meals for one. The ballroom, built for Hollywood's elite, collected dust. Pickford retreated into a smaller and smaller portion of the estate, spending most of her time in her bedroom wing, surrounded by her papers and her solitude. The staff noticed. Maids reported that entire wings went untouched for months. Dust accumulated on furniture. Drapes stayed drawn. The screening room, once used nightly, sat dark and unused. Pickfair was becoming a mausoleum while its owner was still alive. And the house itself began to fail. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but in the slow, grinding way that buildings decay when no one is watching closely. The roof leaked during winter rains, staining ceilings and warping floors. The foundation shifted, cracking plaster and jamming doors. The electrical system, never designed to handle the load of 40 rooms, sparked and failed with increasing frequency. Pickford hired contractors, paid for repairs, but the problems multiplied faster than the fixes. The expense was crushing. Between 1930 and 1935, Pickford spent more than $200,000 on maintenance and repairs. The number is staggering for the era. It represents more money than most Americans would see in a lifetime, poured into a house that seemed determined to fall apart. The divorce came in 1936. Fairbanks wanted out. He had met someone else, a younger woman who did not remind him of his fading career or his crumbling marriage. Pickford did not fight. She had spent years living with a ghost, a husband who was present in name only. The legal proceedings were quiet, efficient, and brutal. Fairbanks left Pickfair for the last time in January of that year. He took nothing with him. The house was Mary's. The debt was Mary's. The legacy was Mary's. And so was the loneliness. After the divorce, Pickford remarried quickly, desperately. Buddy Rogers was younger, kinder, less famous. He moved into Pickfair without protest, but the house was never his. He existed in its margins, a guest in a palace built for someone else, the staff whispered. They reported strange occurrences, doors that opened without cause, cold drafts in sealed rooms, the sound of footsteps in empty hallways. Pickford dismissed it as old house settling, faulty construction, imagination fed by loneliness. But the whispers persisted, and then Douglas died. He collapsed in 1939, far from Los Angeles, far from Pickfair. A heart attack at 56, sudden and final. The news reached Mary by telegram. She locked herself in her bedroom for 3 days. When she emerged, the staff said she looked decades older. The house felt different after that, not immediately, not in ways anyone could name. But the weight had changed. Pickfair had been built as a monument to a marriage, a partnership, a shared dream of permanence. With Fairbanks gone, that dream became a haunting. Pickford stopped renovating. She stopped hosting. She stopped pretending Pickfair was anything other than a burden she could not escape. The rooms grew darker. The staff grew smaller. And the house, once the center of Hollywood, became a place people avoided. They said it was cursed. They said Douglas wandered the halls. They said Mary had gone mad with grief. They said the house itself had absorbed too much sorrow to remain habitable. None of it was true. But none of it was entirely false either. By 1970, Pickfair was dying faster than its owner. Mary Pickford was 77 years old. She had not made a film in decades. Her fortune, once among the largest in Hollywood, had dwindled under the weight of maintaining an estate that served no purpose. The house consumed money, time, and energy without offering anything in return. The structure itself was failing. Inspections revealed asbestos throughout the building, a common material in the 1920s, but now recognized as lethal. The wiring was dangerously outdated, incapable of handling modern appliances, and prone to shorts that threatened fire. The plumbing leaked constantly, damaging walls and floors. The roof needed complete replacement. The foundation showed signs of serious settling, causing cracks that spider-webbed through walls and ceilings. Restoration estimates came back in the millions, not hundreds of thousands, millions, plural. The house was so heavily customized, so poorly documented, that contractors struggled to understand how it had been built in the first place. Each renovation had layered new systems over old ones without removing anything. Electrical conduits ran alongside gas lines. Plumbing crossed through load-bearing walls. Ventilation systems that served one wing had no connection to another. No single architect had designed Pickfair. It was a collaboration between a dozen different contractors across 3 decades, each responding to immediate needs without considering long-term consequences. The result was a house that defied logic, hallways that led nowhere, staircases that served single rooms, wings that could only be accessed through other wings. The layout had become a maze. Pickford had long since stopped using most of it. She confined herself to a bedroom, a sitting room, and a small dining area on the 2nd floor. Everything else remained locked and dark. Staff who had worked at Pickfair for decades reported that they had never entered certain rooms. Doors stayed shut, keys went missing, and no one had the energy or the will to investigate. But the house would not allow neglect. Problems multiplied in the unused spaces. Water damage spread. Mold grew in sealed rooms. Animals nested in the attic and walls. The smell of decay became permanent, hanging in the air despite open windows and industrial fans. Cleaners scrubbed for hours and accomplished nothing. The haunting legends grew worse. Workers refused to enter certain wings. They reported sudden cold, overwhelming dread, the sense that they were not alone. Some quit without explanation. Others demanded higher wages to continue. Pickford herself admitted to hearing footsteps at night, doors closing, voices that sounded like Douglas calling her name. She was not superstitious by nature. Mary Pickford had built her career on discipline, calculation, and refusal to accept limits. She did not believe in ghosts, but she could not deny what she felt in her own home. The house had turned hostile. It resisted repair. It rejected change. It seemed to want something she could no longer provide. Her health declined in parallel with the building. She fell multiple times on staircases that had grown uneven. She suffered from chronic respiratory problems, likely worsened by mold and asbestos exposure. Her memory began to fail, leaving her confused about which rooms she had visited and which remained locked. Doctors urged her to leave. Friends begged her to sell, but she refused. Pickfair was her identity. To abandon it would mean admitting defeat, admitting that the dream she and Douglas had built was nothing but illusion, admitting that Hollywood's first palace was just another house, subject to the same forces of entropy and decay as everything else. But the decision was taken from her. In 1976, Buddy Rogers made the call. He contacted real estate agents quietly, without telling Mary. He wanted offers. He wanted options. He wanted a way out that did not require her permission or her participation. The offers came back brutal. No one wanted Pickfair as it stood. The property had value, but only for the land. 18 acres in Beverly Hills, minutes from Sunset Boulevard, was worth millions. The house was worth nothing. Worse than nothing. Demolition would cost hundreds of thousands before construction could even begin. Potential buyers toured the property and recoiled. They saw the scale of the problem immediately. The house was not salvageable. Every system needed replacement. Every room needed gutting. The foundation itself was questionable. Any restoration would cost more than building new, and the result would still be a house designed for a world that no longer existed. Preservationists tried to intervene. They argued that Pickfair was a historic landmark, a symbol of Hollywood's golden age, a structure that deserved protection. They appealed to the city, to the state, to cultural organizations. They offered to raise money, organize campaigns, pressure the owners to reconsider. None of it mattered. The house was privately owned. Mary was in no condition to fight, and Buddy wanted it gone. Mary Pickford died in 1979. She was 87 years old. She died in her bedroom at Pickfair, in the only part of the house she still recognized. The funeral was small. The press coverage was respectful, but brief. Hollywood had moved on decades earlier. The estate passed to Buddy Rogers. He sold it within months. The buyer was Pia Zadora, a singer and actress looking to establish herself in Beverly Hills. She paid millions for the land and made one promise. She would try to preserve Pickfair. She lasted less than a year. The house defeated her the same way it had defeated everyone else. The repairs were endless. The costs were staggering. And the building itself seemed to resist every attempt at renovation. Workers reported the same problems that had plagued the estate for decades. Cold rooms, strange sounds, a pervasive sense that they were unwelcome. In 1980, Zadora made the call. Pickfair would be demolished, completely, Every wall, every beam, every stone. The house that had hosted kings and defined Hollywood would be erased. The demolition began in late summer. Crews arrived with bulldozers, jackhammers, and industrial dumpsters. They expected routine work. Old house, outdated systems, straightforward teardown. What they found was something else entirely. The house fought back, not literally, not supernaturally, but in the way that buildings fight when they were never built correctly in the first place. Walls that should have been load-bearing were not. Support beams existed where no blueprint showed them. Entire sections of the house had no structural logic, held together by improvisation and luck. Demolition crews described it as a nightmare. They would remove one wall and discover 3 more behind it. They would tear out flooring and find chambers no one knew existed. They would follow electrical wiring that led nowhere, plumbing that served no fixture, ventilation ducts that opened into sealed spaces. Pickfair had grown without planning for so long that it had become architecturally incoherent. But the physical challenges were not what stayed with the workers. They reported unease, not fear exactly, but discomfort. The house felt wrong. Too quiet despite the noise of demolition. Too cold despite the summer heat. Several workers refused to return after their first day. Others demanded to work only in pairs, unwilling to be alone in any section of the property. One foreman described entering the main hall and feeling sudden, crushing dread. He could not explain it. The room was empty. Sunlight poured through the windows. But he felt watched, judged, and unwelcome. He left and did not go back. The stories spread. Reporters arrived, drawn by rumors of hauntings and Hollywood history. Photographers captured the demolition in progress, images of broken walls and exposed beams that revealed how fragile Pickfair had always been. The house looked smaller in destruction, less grand, more pathetic. The public reacted with surprising indifference. Some mourned the loss of a landmark. Preservationists wrote angry editorials, but most people simply accepted it. Pickfair belonged to a Hollywood that no longer existed. Silent films, formal dinner parties, and the illusion of permanence had given way to television, casual celebrity, and the understanding that fame was temporary. The site was cleared by fall. Every trace of Pickfair disappeared. The gardens were plowed under, the pool was filled, the foundations were dug up and hauled away. The land was leveled, graded, and prepared for new construction. Pia Zadora built a larger house in its place, a Georgian-style mansion twice the size of Pickfair, with modern systems, open floor plans, and none of the history. She named it Pickfair in tribute, but the name felt hollow. This was not Pickfair. It was simply another house on Summit Drive, distinguished only by the ghost of what had stood there before. And the ghost remained, not literally, but in the way that stories persist when buildings do not. People still speak of Pickfair as if it exists. They reference the parties, the glamour, the romance of Mary and Douglas. They repeat the tales of hauntings, of cold rooms, of a house that could not be saved. But they misunderstand what Pickfair represented. It was never about the building. It was about what people needed the building to be. A symbol of permanence in an industry built on illusion. A monument to fame in a world where fame evaporates. A palace for people who wanted to believe they were royalty. Mary Pickford understood this. She spent the last decades of her life trapped in a house she could not leave and could not maintain. She knew Pickfair was failing. She knew it was costing more than it returned. But she stayed because leaving would mean admitting that the dream was over. And when she died, the dream died with her. Pickfair could not survive without the people who believed in it. It could not be preserved because preservation requires purpose. No one knew what to do with a 40-room mansion designed for a social world that had disappeared. No one wanted to pay millions to restore a house that served no function, so it was destroyed, not as an act of vandalism, not as a betrayal of history, but as a release. Pickfair had become a burden too heavy for anyone to carry. Its demolition was not tragic. It was necessary. The lesson is uncomfortable. We build monuments to make ourselves permanent. We pour money, time, and emotion into structures that we believe will outlast us. But buildings are not permanent. They decay. They fail. They become obsolete. And when they do, we face a choice. Do we spend everything to save them, or do we let them go? Pickfair demanded too much. It demanded constant expansion, constant attention, constant sacrifice. It absorbed the marriage of Mary and Douglas, the wealth they had earned, the years they could have spent living rather than maintaining. It became a prison disguised as a palace. And in the end, it could not be saved, because saving it would have required more sacrifice than anyone was willing to give. The site on Summit Drive still carries the name Pickfair, but the house that earned that name is gone. No plaque marks where it stood. No foundation remains. The land has been transformed so completely that nothing of the original structure survives. Some buildings absorb too much human longing to remain standing. They become heavy with expectation, burdened with the weight of what they represent. And when that weight becomes unbearable, the only solution is destruction. Pickfair rose as Hollywood's first symbol of untouchable fame. It collapsed under secrets, sorrow, and the simple truth that nothing lasts. Not fame, not love, not even the monuments we build to convince ourselves otherwise. The house is gone, but the longing remains. Pickfair's story is not unique. Hollywood has lost dozens of legendary estates. Marion Davies's Beach House, Rudolph Valentino's Falcon Lair, Clara Bow's Desert Ranch. Each represented the same dream, the same belief that fame could be made permanent through architecture. Each failed for the same reasons. If you found this story compelling, consider which estate should be explored next. Leave a comment with your suggestions. And if you want more stories about the hidden costs of Hollywood's golden age, subscribe to the channel. Every structure has a story. Every monument has a price.